Hello. How did y'all get here today? Anyone ride their bikes here today? All right. Loud and proud bicyclists. Loud and proud bicyclists. Public transportation, also a great way to get around. Anyone take the F train here today? All right. Love it, hate it, it's the F, you know. Anyone drive here today? Or you're not going to admit it if you did. It's okay. Cars have a role in our cities as well. So I usually walk, ride my bike, take the train. I like to go places. I like to use my legs. I was at a spinning class the other day. I don't usually do that. I like to get traction when I'm riding my bike and when I'm working politically. Traction's important. But there I was, sweating. Anyone else do a spinning? You guys do spinning classes, right? And so it's the end of the class, and the instructor, who is very, very enthusiastic, is saying to me and others, "You're changing the world, you're changing the world." And we're just going like, we're changing the world, okay. I mean, I'm getting a great workout, but I didn't really feel like I was changing the world in 45 minutes. If I have a message for you today, is that you, New Yorkers here today, can change the world. The timing is lined up very auspiciously for you to change the world this year in 45 minutes or less. A couple years ago, we officially, Homo sapiens, I see other humanoids here today, we officially became an urban species. There's more humans living in cities than not. And yeah, it's something to celebrate, absolutely. Cities are inherently green. A New Yorker burns only 1/3 as much carbon as the average American. Cities are vibrant, happy places where we celebrate our diversity. We get through our differences, and we all live happily most of the time. So it's a good thing. And by 2050, more than 2/3 of humanity will live in cities. And here in America, we're going to gain 100 million new residents by then, most of whom will live in cities. The next point may be a little more challenging for you. I'm asserting that cities are defined by their streets. Streets as the space between buildings. 1/4 of New York's land area is the streets. 80% of our open space, our public space, is the streets. What happens on the streets defines a city. We've all traveled, we've all seen how different cities have different vibes. But really, we are made by our streets. Our physiology, how fat we are, is determined by how often we walk or bike, which is determined by the streets. How depressed or happy we are, how often we talk to our neighbors, how often our kids play outside. All of this is decided by how our streets are designed, managed, apportioned. So the summation here, my theorem, my little theorem, is that how streets go in the next few years will really to a large degree determine the future of our species. I know that sounds a little grandiose, delusional. We all tell ourselves stories to make our work relevant, so this is mine. So this is Cities 1.0. This is the 20th century city. The car was supposed to deliver us from mayhem and pollution and dirtiness. You know, before that we had horses and horse shit everywhere on the streets. Cars were supposed to be this deliverance. It hasn't really worked out that way. Cars and cities don't really mix that well, and I'll explain why in a moment. So when I was a kid, I remember being promised, you know, hovercraft and jetpacks and all kinds of newfangled technology that is going to make us happy and save our lives. We're still waiting for those things. Not sure if they're ever going to arrive. But I'll submit to you that this is the future. This is the newfangled future that actually works. You know, a decent bus or tram that arrives on time, a safe place to walk or bike, and lively public space where we can all experience each other in the way that cities were supposed to do in the first place, these places where we interact, transact, come together and explore and innovate. That can't happen when streets are just for driving. And I'm showing the leader of the Republican Party because the Republicans killed a bill this year that would have unlocked a lot more money to transform U.S. streets, U.S. cities, so that they are less polluting, less carbon intensive, more efficient, more people-oriented. And one of the reasons is that, it's so obvious. Streets are for driving. Come on. Isn't that so obvious? I mean, this is a typical street, right? The reason we have to get past that old canard is that when streets are for driving in cities, there's just no space for everything else. Cars are great tools on occasion, but they just take up way too much space. So this is 50 New Yorkers traveling in this photograph. Average vehicle occupancy in New York City is about 1.4. A lot of single drivers out there. It's hard to meet people when you're driving. This is also 50 people traveling in this photograph, and those buses are only half full. And again, 50 New Yorkers traveling on bikes. We closed 42nd Street for a whole day. It was really fun. If you ever want to close the street down to cars, just apply for a film permit. Works great. But you can see it, like when you go from that to that, there's so much room. All of a sudden you have enormous possibilities. We've seen some really riveting talks today about a flowering of public space, what can happen in public space. In mega cities like New York, Tokyo, Beijing, Lagos, there's a pent-up demand for people to celebrate and interact. There's not a lot you actually have to do, but just get the cars out of the way and repurpose that space. So this is another big critique we're hearing right now on the front lines of the very political movement towards more people-oriented streets and cities. It's that whenever you try to change a street to encourage more public transportation or walking or biking or, heaven forbid, diversity or social interaction, that amounts to social engineering, and that's a bad thing. Well, I have news for those folks. Whenever you design a street, engineer a street, you're automatically social engineering. You're engaging in social engineering. There are always social implications to how we design our public space. As Marcos said, public space, the way it's designed, will prohibit and encourage activities depending on your design parameters. And for so long, the only design parameter has been to shoehorn as much traffic as possible down the streets where we live and work and hopefully play. We did a study a few years ago where we looked at 4 neighborhoods in New York: Brooklyn Heights, Chinatown, Astoria, Queens, and Kingsbridge in the Bronx. And we found, upon interviewing hundreds of households in each of those neighborhoods on 3 different kinds of streets, heavy, medium, and light traffic streets, there are stark differences in people's quality of life depending on how much traffic courses down their street. You literally have many times more friends and relationships on streets where you have less traffic. It's common sense, right? But the fact that we studied it and measured it made all the difference in changing policy here in New York. There's a whole host of quality of life indicators that line up the same way. When you get cars out of the way, people are literally happier, they're healthier, they're more connected to their neighborhoods, they have a greater sense of fulfillment, their kids play outside more often. So really, I submit to you, this is how we should be designing our streets to maximize what cities were created for in the first place: human interaction. The last couple of years have been tremendously exciting for anyone working in the public realm or in transportation. Life has been coming back to so many of New York City's public spaces. We now have more than 50 pedestrian plazas here in New York, recently reclaimed from parking or car space. We have protected bike lanes, more and more of them all over the place. Biking is booming. This is Prospect Park West. This morning I took my 3.5-year-old daughter in our cargo bike to the farmer's market to buy some pumpkins, and it's really amazing to see so many more people using that lane. You know, kids going to soccer practice, neighbors running into each other, happenstance on the street, you know, talking politics. Even the sidewalk is livelier now that the cars have been moved out, and there's more. You can actually hear each other. You know, can you like have a conversation? The Greeks had this concept of the agora, you know, that the fundamental, granular stuff of democracy are those like conversations that you have with your neighbors in public space. Maybe we're getting that back. This is select bus service, bus rapid transit. Much more economically efficient than digging like a Second Avenue subway, which costs $2 billion per mile. We all love subways. But in a financially constrained future, if we have a financially constrained future, these kinds of surface public transportation investments are really smart. You can move as many people on a surface busway like this with protected lanes as with a subway system. And this is maybe my favorite, again, being the proud father of a 3.5-year-old. We have dozens of these new play streets where kids who don't have access to parks or playgrounds are now getting safe play space on their own streets because the cars have been kicked to the curb. And you can apply for one of these play streets now from the city. So if you're motivated to use your 45 minutes, you can go online to the DOT, Department of Transportation's website, and apply for one of these lovely play streets. Some of them last all summer. Some will soon last all year long. And in March, I'm going to hear the loud and proud bicyclists, or those who might soon will be. We're going to get public bike share in March. Isn't that cool? 10,000 bicycles all over the city. Right here in Dumbo, there's going to be several stations. Luckily, the local real estate interests have really gotten behind this and are pushing it hard. You know, transit access has everything to do with real estate value. So all of this is really exciting. It's happening. New York is actually influencing the world right now. Other cities are taking notice. They're redesigning their streets. I think we're at the beginning of what could become a worldwide public revolution of reclaiming streets from the car. In New York, the polling looks pretty good. Local council members like East Harlem's Melissa Mark Viverito is pushing for safer streets, more bike lanes, more pedestrian space. We need more of that. But really the challenge that we face here in New York and in America and around the world are really the persistence of those falsehoods I showed you, that streets are for driving, and that to somehow make the decision, the public policy decision, that we're going to minimize car use and promote biking, walking, and transit is somehow communist. So we've got to get past that. We can get past that. We will only get past that if New York can continue this revolution. New York is a leader of cities here in America and in the world, maybe the world's most influential city. We have a mayoral election a year from now, and it's very uncertain as to whether or not our next mayor, our next city council members are going to continue or even accelerate this transportation and streets revolution. I'm asking you to get involved. I'm asking all of you to devote 45 minutes of your lives to attending a community board meeting. There are 59 community boards in New York City. Get to know yours. I see someone maybe agrees. No? Have you been to a community board meeting? They can be very mind-numbingly boring. But that's where the action is. If you don't show up, you don't get what you want. So take action now. Go to your community board meeting, stand up for safe, people-oriented streets, or go online to the Department of Transportation and apply for a play street. They have actual 20-mile-per-hour residential zones now that you can apply for. Street racks, you can actually repurpose a parking space in front of your house or business for bike parking or for public space. So this is our responsibility as New Yorkers. I know there's people from maybe around the country, around the world watching here in Dumbo, Brooklyn, but we have a responsibility as New Yorkers, as urban leaders, innovators, to make this happen. So who's maybe going to devote a few minutes this year to making this revolution continue? Show of hands. All right. Excellent. I'm watching. We're going to follow up with you. But thank you so much for being here today, caring about the future of cities. It's happening, and you can make it happen. Thank you.